If you thought you'd seen everything the Cleveland Browns could possibly do to confuse, frustrate, and shock their own fan base, think again. Because what happened after the final whistle didn't just flip a season, it flipped the entire future of the franchise. This is Spill News, where secrets don't leak, they explode. On the surface, it looked like a routine end to another rough year, a record broken, a game won, cameras rolling, smiles forced. But then Myles Garrett stepped in front of the mic and said that, not praise, not PR talk, a message, and suddenly the internet froze. Because when Garrett publicly signaled the Browns must build around Shedeur Sanders, it wasn't just support, it felt like a verdict, a warning, a line drawn inside the locker room. And just hours later, another move sent shockwaves through the league. Dillon Gabriel traded. Coincidence? Or fallout? Fans started connecting dots. Group chats went crazy. Blogs lit up. One post read, "Bro said too much, and somebody paid the price." Another asked a question no one inside the organization wanted asked out loud. If you were in that building, same pressure, same politics, same power games, what would you do? Because once you hear what was really happening behind closed doors, trust me, it gets uglier. Tonight isn't about box scores or polite post-game quotes. It's about a sentence that landed like a grenade in a room full of people pretending everything was fine. The season was already over. The cameras were still hot, and a franchise that lives on confusion thought it could quietly walk into the offseason again. That's when Myles Garrett spoke, and the tone of the Cleveland Browns shifted in real time. What sounded like praise carried weight. What felt like confidence sounded like a directive. And inside that moment, something cracked that had been held together by silence, loyalty, and fear of saying the wrong thing out loud. For years, Garrett has been a steady constant in a building that changes faces like wallpaper. Coaches come and go. Quarterbacks rotate. Promises get made, then quietly forgotten. Through it all, Garrett stayed. He took the hits. He gave the quotes. He carried a defense on his back while the offense searched for itself week after week. So when a man like that chooses his words carefully, people listen. And when he doesn't hedge, doesn't soften, doesn't dodge, people inside the building hear something else entirely. They hear expectation. They hear authority. They hear a line being drawn. What the public saw was simple. A star defender complimenting a young quarterback after a hard-fought win. But inside the facility, inside the offices where decisions get whispered before they're announced, the reaction was different. Phones buzzed. Staffers exchanged looks. One assistant reportedly muttered, "That wasn't in the script." Because this wasn't just about football. This was about control, about direction, about who the organization was choosing to listen to when things finally stopped working. The Browns have a long history of pretending chaos is strategy. They sell patience while making impulsive moves. They talk culture while leaking frustration. And the players feel it. They always do. That's why the locker room matters more than the podium. That's why a comment that sounds harmless to fans can feel explosive to executives. Garrett didn't call a meeting. He didn't demand a press conference. He just said what everyone had been thinking, but nobody wanted to be responsible for saying. Build around him, not evaluate, not consider. Build. And when a franchise cornerstone speaks like that, it creates pressure that can't be undone. Because now every decision is measured against that sentence. Every move is interpreted through that lens. Especially when another quarterback is already in the room, already watching, already understanding what that message implies without a single name being mentioned. Football players are trained to read gaps, leverage, body language. They know when the air changes. And that air changed immediately. Behind the scenes, the tension had been building for weeks. Practice reps weren't just reps anymore. They were auditions. Meetings weren't just film sessions. They were quiet evaluations. Players noticed who got grace and who didn't, who got patience and who got side eyes. The coaching staff insisted everything was open, competitive, fair. But locker rooms have a way of exposing truths that press releases can't hide. And by the time Garrett spoke, the room already knew something was coming. That's what made the timing so brutal. The season finale wasn't just an ending. It was a reveal, a final test wrapped inside a meaningless game that somehow meant everything. Veterans wanted clarity. Young players wanted security, coaches wanted control, and front office executives wanted time. Garrett didn't give them time. He gave them momentum. And momentum, once it starts, doesn't ask for permission. Fans sensed it immediately. Social media lit up with clipped quotes, slowed down footage, and speculative threads that went viral in minutes. Some called it leadership. Others called it reckless. A few called it betrayal. But almost everyone agreed on one thing. This didn't feel accidental. This felt intentional. Like a message sent not just to the public, but to the people who would decide the next chapter of the franchise. Inside the building, the mood shifted from cautious optimism to quiet panic. Meetings stretched longer. Conversations got more careful. One staff reportedly joked, "Guess the off-season started early," but nobody laughed, because when a respected leader speaks publicly, it limits private options. You can't walk it back. You can't unhear it. And you can't pretend it didn't change the math. The most uncomfortable part was what went unsaid. Garrett didn't mention systems. He didn't mention schemes. He didn't mention patience. He talked about belief. And belief is dangerous when it doesn't align with the people holding the contracts. Because belief creates loyalty, and loyalty creates sides. Suddenly, what used to be a depth chart started to look like a dividing line. Players talk. They always have. And word spread quickly that the comment wasn't a spur-of-the-moment thing, that it reflected conversations happening quietly in the locker room, that veterans had already started leaning one way, that trust had been forming where it hadn't existed before. Whether that was true or not almost didn't matter. The perception alone was enough to force movement. By the next morning, the front office faced a familiar Browns dilemma. Do you back the voice your players trust? Or do you protect the structure you built? Do you follow momentum, or do you try to slow it down before it turns into expectation? History suggested they'd hesitate, but this time felt different. This time, the comment came from someone who couldn't be dismissed as emotional, inexperienced, or expendable. And that's where the real pressure began. Because somewhere in the building, another quarterback was waking up, checking his phone, and realizing the narrative had shifted overnight. No announcement had been made. No decision had been leaked, but the silence felt loud. The kind of silence that precedes movement. The kind that tells you something is already happening, even if nobody has admitted it yet. What followed next wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. Meetings behind closed doors. Short answers. Delayed responses. And a growing sense that one comment had accelerated a process that was supposed to take months. Because when leadership speaks without clearance, organizations either fall in line or push back hard. And the Browns were about to show which one they were. But what came next wasn't just a response. It was a signal, a move that confirmed every fear, every theory, and every late-night group chat rumor swirling since that microphone moment. And once it happened, there was no pretending this was just football anymore. It was a kind of organizational crossroads that exposes motives, not intentions. Everyone involved understood that the next decision would speak louder than any press conference ever could. It would reveal who held power, whose voice mattered, and which promises were real versus rehearsed. For a franchise haunted by half-steps and reversals, this moment demanded commitment, not caution. And as the days stretched on, with phones ringing and agents calling, one truth became impossible to ignore. The message had been sent, the room had heard it, and the response, whatever it would be, was already in motion. Nobody inside Cleveland realized yet how irreversible that response would be, or who would pay the price first when dawn came. By the time the move became public, the organization had already lost control of the narrative. It didn't break with a dramatic press conference or a cleanly timed announcement. It leaked, first through whispers, then through half-confirmed posts, then through screenshots that spread faster than the official statement ever could. Dillon Gabriel was gone, traded quietly, efficiently, and with language so carefully worded it almost sounded apologetic. But nobody was fooled, because everyone understood the context. And context is everything. Inside the league, reactions split instantly. Some executives called it decisive. Others called it panic. Former players jumped on podcasts within hours, speaking in coded language that didn't need decoding. When a locker room chooses, one said, the front office either listens or loses it. Fans replayed Garrett's comments over and over, syncing them against the timing of the trade like detectives convinced the truth was hidden in the overlap. And once that idea took hold, it became impossible to shake. The Browns tried to frame the trade as business, roster balance, asset management, long-term flexibility. But none of that landed, because business moves don't usually follow emotional statements from franchise legends this closely, and business moves don't usually feel this final. Gabriel hadn't been just another name on the depth chart. He was part of a plan, or at least he had been sold to the public as one. Developmental, patient, competitive, all the buzzwords that buy organizations time. And now, suddenly, time was gone. Behind the scenes, the situation was messier than anyone wanted to admit. Coaches had been split for weeks. Some believed in letting competition breathe. Others felt the locker room had already made its choice. One assistant reportedly argued that once veterans lean a certain way, you either support that direction or risk fracturing the room entirely. Another pushed back, warning that letting players dictate quarterback decisions was a dangerous precedent. Those conversations didn't stay contained. They never do. They leak into tone, into meetings, into how reps are distributed, and players notice everything. That's what made the trade feel less like a surprise and more like confirmation. It validated every rumor that had been floating quietly since midseason. That Garrett's comment wasn't just commentary, but culmination. That the organization had already been drifting toward this outcome, and the microphone moment simply forced their hand. In that sense, the trade was a reaction. It was a reveal. The public fallout was immediate. Fans who defended the front office for years felt whiplash. Others felt relief. A smaller, louder group accused the team of caving to pressure, of choosing popularity over process. Social media became a battlefield of clip quotes and hot takes. One viral post read, "So when Myles talks, people lose jobs?" Another replied, "No, when Myles talks, people finally listen." The divide wasn't just between fans. It was between philosophies. And then came the leaks. Screenshots of alleged text messages. Anonymous quotes from sources close to the situation. One blog claimed there had been heated exchanges in the quarterback room weeks earlier. Another suggested that Gabriel had sensed the shift long before the trade, pointing to body language on the sideline and sudden changes in practice rotation. None of it was confirmed. All of it felt plausible. And in the internet era, plausible is often enough to become accepted truth. What made things worse was the silence. Gabriel didn't immediately speak. The team issued a statement that said everything and nothing at the same time. Garrett stayed quiet too, which only amplified the speculation. Because when someone makes a statement that powerful and then disappears, people assume the fallout was real. If there was nothing to see, someone would have said so. Instead, the quiet stretched on, heavy and uncomfortable. Insiders started floating another theory, that the trade wasn't just about performance, but about alignment, about belief, about whether the quarterback room matched the emotional core of the team. Football people love to talk about culture when they don't want to explain specifics, and culture had become the word of the week in Cleveland. The implication was clear without ever being said outright. One quarterback fit where the room was headed, the other didn't. As the days passed, more reactions surfaced. Former Browns players chimed in with cryptic messages about finally choosing a direction. Analysts debated whether it was smart or reckless to let a defensive leader shape offensive destiny. One sarcastic segment joked, "Next thing you know, the kicker's picking coordinators." But beneath the humor was discomfort, because this wasn't normal. At least it wasn't supposed to be. Then came the fan videos. Long, emotional rants recorded in cars, basements, and bedrooms. Some praised Garrett for saying what needed to be said. Others accused him of overstepping. One video went viral where a fan shouted, "If he's a heart of the team, why wouldn't you listen?" Another shot back, "Because this isn't a player-run league." The comment sections became war zones, each side convinced the other was missing the point. Lost in the noise was Gabriel himself, a player whose exit had become symbolic rather than personal. He was no longer just a quarterback. He was the proof point, the example, the casualty. Every organization has one moment where a human decision gets flattened into a storyline. This was that moment, and the lack of empathy in the discourse only underscored how far things had drifted from football into theater. Inside the Browns facility, the mood reportedly shifted again. The decision had been made. The backlash was being absorbed. And now, the focus turned forward. Meetings centered on alignment, messaging, damage control, how to present unity without explaining fracture. Coaches adjusted language. Players were reminded to keep things internal. But the toothpaste was already out of the tube. The story had escaped the building, and it wasn't coming back. What unsettled many around the league was how fast it all happened. One comment, one trade, a complete narrative reset. That speed suggested something deeper than coincidence. It suggested readiness. As if the organization had been waiting for a moment strong enough to justify what they already wanted to do. Garrett's words gave them that moment, and Gabriel's trade became the punctuation mark. But just when it seemed like the story had peaked, when the trade felt like the final act, another name began circulating in the background, not in headlines, not in official reports, in whispers, in speculative threads, in keep an eye on this post that ended with ellipses, because the move didn't just answer questions, it raised new ones, about who had been pushing for this outcome behind the scenes, about what promises had been made, and about whether the fallout was really over or just beginning. By the end of the week, one thing was clear. The Browns hadn't just made a roster move, they had exposed a power dynamic. And once power dynamics are exposed, they don't quietly reset, they escalate. And somewhere, just out of frame, another decision was already forming, one that would make the trade look like a warm-up. Because just when everyone thought the storm had passed, another connection surfaced, another conversation leaked, another narrative thread pulled tight enough to unravel everything all over again. What followed wasn't loud chaos. It was something colder. The kind of aftermath that doesn't trend immediately but sits in the background, changing behavior, altering trust, and quietly reshaping futures. Inside the building, people stopped asking questions out loud. They started watching. Who walked into which office? Who stopped returning calls? Who suddenly had full support? And who was described as day-to-day in conversations that had nothing to do with injury reports. This is how organizations fracture, not with explosions, but with silence. The locker room felt it first. Veterans who had already chosen their side leaned further in. Younger players looked for signals, not speeches. A nod here, a joke there, a rep earned, a rep skipped. Alignment became visible without ever being announced. And in that environment, pressure doesn't just sit on the quarterback, it spreads. Receivers run sharper routes because they sense opportunity. Linemen protect harder because belief changes effort. Defensive players talk differently when they feel the future is set. Whether that belief was earned or manufactured almost didn't matter. It was real enough to move people. Outside the facility, the narrative kept mutating. Blogs claimed there had been a closed-door meeting where veterans voiced frustration about indecision at the top. A podcast hinted that one executive had resisted the trade until the last minute, only to be overruled. A viral thread suggested the move was tied to an unreported promise made months earlier, when the season was already slipping away and leverage was at its highest. None of it could be confirmed. All of it fit the timeline too well to ignore. And then there was Garrett, the man at the center of it all, saying nothing. That silence became its own message, because if his words had been misinterpreted. This was the moment to clarify. If the trade had nothing to do with his comments, this was a chance to reset the conversation. But no reset came, just distance. And distance invites projection. Fans filled in the gaps with their own conclusions, each more dramatic than the last. Some painted Garrett as a reluctant kingmaker, a leader forced to speak because nobody else would. Others accused him of crossing an invisible line, of turning private influence into public pressure. A smaller but louder group framed him as the conscience of a broken franchise, finally refusing to play along. The truth, as always, likely lives somewhere in between. But once a story becomes symbolic, facts lose priority, meaning takes over. Meanwhile, the quarterback at the center of the storm carried on like nothing was wrong. Press conferences stayed measured. Answers stayed calm. There were no victory laps, no subtle digs, just repetition of team-first language and phrases that sounded rehearsed because they had to be. In moments like this, every word becomes evidence. Every pause becomes a headline. So he kept it clean, almost too clean, which only fed the idea that something bigger was being protected. Privately, sources claimed the mental toll was real, that the pressure of suddenly being the guy without officially being named came with isolation. That support felt conditional. That trust was loud in public and cautious in private. This is a part of the story fans rarely see. The in-between, the waiting, the not knowing, being elevated while still being evaluated. It's where confidence is either forged or cracked. As the weeks passed, another shift happened. The trade stopped being debated on its own and started being used as precedent. Commentators reference it when talking about player power, about modern locker rooms, about whether leadership now came from contracts or credibility. Cleveland became a case study again, not because of losing, but because of what losing had forced into the open. And that may have been the most uncomfortable outcome of all. Then came the counter leaks. Articles suggesting the organization had always planned to move on, that the comment didn't force anything, it just accelerated the timeline, that front office cohesion had never been stronger, that culture was aligned. These stories sounded reassuring. They also sounded defensive, because when things are truly stable, nobody needs to insist they are. Behind closed doors, the future was being sold to players, to sponsors, to season ticket holders. The message was consistency, vision, commitment. But even as that message rolled out, cracks remained, because commitment to one direction always creates resentment in another. And not everyone had been consulted before the pivot. Some just woke up to it. What made the situation even more volatile was the sense that the story wasn't finished, that the trade was a chapter, not a conclusion, that other decisions were still coming, and that each one would be judged against the same moment. The microphone, the comment, the shift. From that point forward, nothing could happen in isolation. Everything was connected. Fans felt it too. Hope crept in cautiously. The dangerous kind. The kind that comes from believing the franchise might finally have a spine. That someone might finally be driving instead of reacting. But Browns fans have lived this movie before. They know how quickly belief can turn into regret. So optimism stayed guarded, wrapped in sarcasm and conditioned skepticism. The most revealing moment came weeks later, when asked a seemingly harmless question about leadership. Garrett smiled, paused, and redirected. It was a masterclass in saying nothing. But the pause said enough. Because people don't pause when there's nothing at stake. They pause when they're choosing what not to say. By then, the trade had faded from headlines, replaced by draft speculation and off-season noise. But inside the organization, the ripple effects remained. Trust had been redistributed, power had been clarified, and a precedent had been set. Whether that precedent would lead to stability or chaos was still unknown. But one thing was certain. The era of pretending nothing mattered was over. This wasn't just about one defender, one quarterback, or one trade. It was about what happens when silence breaks, when influence becomes visible, when the internal becomes external. Cleveland didn't just choose a direction. It exposed how those choices are actually made when pressure outweighs patience. And maybe that's why this moment will linger longer than the record books ever will. Because years from now, fans might forget the stat lines. They might forget the score. But they'll remember the moment the franchise stopped whispering and started moving. Whether that movement leads to redemption or another chapter of regret remains to be seen. All that's clear now is this. Something changed. Not on the field, not on paper, but in the space between authority and belief. And once that space is crossed, there's no going back. The Browns didn't just trade a quarterback. They revealed who they're willing to listen to when it matters most. And in a league built on control, that revelation may end up being the most dangerous move of all. Before you click away, let's be real for a second. This wasn't just another off-season move. This wasn't just a quote taken out of context. What you just heard was the sound of a franchise standing at a crossroads and choosing a direction that will define the next decade of football in Cleveland. When a leader like Myles Garrett speaks, when an organization responds the way the Cleveland Browns just did, history tells us one thing. There are consequences. Sometimes they look like redemption. Sometimes they look like regret. And sometimes they look like both at the same time. So now the real question isn't what happened. The real question is what comes next. Was this the moment the Browns finally stopped hesitating and committed to a future built on belief? Or was this another emotional pivot that will come back to haunt them when the pressure really hits? Is Shedeur Sanders truly the answer, or just the next name fans will argue about when things go wrong? And don't dodge this part. If you were in that building, same pressure, same locker room, same power dynamics, would you have made the same call? Would you trust the voice of your players over the plans of your executives? Would you risk control to gain belief? This is where you come in. Drop your honest thoughts in the comments. No filter, no safe takes. Do you think this officially launched a new era in Cleveland, or did the Browns just expose another crack in the foundation? If you believe this story isn't over, and trust me, it isn't, hit that subscribe button right now. Turn on notifications, because we're tracking every move, every leak, every quiet shift that happens next. Like this video if you believe leadership matters more than spreadsheets. Share it with every Browns fan who needs to see what's really unfolding behind the scenes. Because one thing is clear, once the silence broke, there was no going back. And the next chapter might be even louder.